So the video today, as you can see, is revolving around something called dissolved oxygen. A little bit new concept, we'll go through that. But also you can kind of consider this the oxygen cycle. You're not going to see a typical diagram like we've seen with the water cycle or any of our other cycles. So again, kind of like the phosphorus cycle, this one is a little bit different. We're going to focus on a couple of different things. But the goal here, as you can see, is similar. We're trying to trace the movement of oxygen. Now remember, it's not just oxygen, it's the oxygen molecule. So O2, so oxygen double bonded covalently to another oxygen molecule, how that is moving from place to place. We are going to really focus on aquatic ecosystems, so water ecosystems, and how water gets, or how oxygen gets in and out, and the role of different things like photosynthesis and respiration. And as you can see, mainly, how does oxygen get into an aquatic ecosystem? What takes it out of an ecosystem? And why is that important? So you'll start to see some connections between some of our other cycles here, but that's really what we're doing here today, is taking a look at dissolved oxygen. Well, first of all, what is it? And then how does it get into water? How does it get taken out of water? That's our goal for the day today. So what is DO, or dissolved oxygen? Well, remember, dissolved, okay, we've seen that word before. You can take salt and you dissolve it in water. The funky thing to think about is that you can do the same thing with oxygen, okay? So as you can see here, it's a gas that dissolves in water. We've got a picture here of what that would look like. So we have a whole bunch of water molecules, and in between those different water molecules, you'll see molecules of oxygen. And when we talk about, people breathing or terrestrial organisms breathing, they are taking in this exact same thing right here, breathing it in, goes into their lungs, and we use that to do respiration. Aquatic organisms that do respiration need the exact same thing. However, they need it in just a slightly different format. It's dissolved in water, and that oxygen then gets filtered over their gills, and they then use that oxygen for respiration. So nothing overly different, it's just where it is. Okay? So from here, this slide is extremely important. I would make sure you get this down in your notes. How does DO get into water? Three main ways. I'm going to go into more detail on each of these, but they are diffusion. We've talked about that with the carbon cycle. So it's, as you can see, the random motion of molecules. Remember, we're dealing with concentration here. You'll see that on the next slide. So we'll get into that more next. Afterwards, we have a new vocabulary word. We have aeration, which is simple mixing. Okay. You'll see what that means here in just a little bit. And then the obvious one is photosynthesis. The process where plants, even aquatic plants, producing a byproduct of oxygen through that process of photosynthesis. All right, so let's take a dive into diffusion here. So as you can see, there's a boundary here. All right, so let's just put some waves in here to demonstrate the surface of this body of water. Okay, and remember, we have two options here when it comes to diffusion. Diffusion can allow things to go into it, or it can get rid of it, depending on the concentration. So over here on the left-hand side, we see a situation where that dissolved oxygen is leaving the water column because the saturation rate is so high. Okay, there's more than enough dissolved oxygen in the water. There's less of it in the atmosphere, so it is going to try to even things out and dissolve it, or diffuse it into the air. In most situations, though, we're going to have something over here on the right-hand side, where our water column or our body of water has a lower concentration compared to the atmosphere, and we're going to diffuse that down into that body of water. Okay, so again, diffusion does both, and you need to remember it deals with the concentration. Next up, well, I guess taking a step back here, well, why would water change the amount of dissolved oxygen? One of the most important ones, and if we would have gone on our field trip to the Vermilion River, we would talk a lot about temperature. And the key thing here, I would write this guy down right here. The warmer water is, the less dissolved oxygen it can hold, and you can see that in the graph down below. And the reason why this is that it deals with how fast the water molecules are moving. Okay, on a warmer day, those molecules are moving quite a bit faster, which is going to allow the dissolved oxygen to move faster and open up spaces for that dissolved oxygen to leave that body of water. Whereas if it was colder, those water molecules wouldn't be moving, which would then not allow the oxygen molecules dissolved in that water to move either, so kind of trapping that dissolved oxygen in that colder water. Now, why is this important? Well, it relates to the biosphere. Okay, what's interesting, and I mean, it shouldn't be, but if you think about you exercising, well, the more you exercise, well, what happens to your rate of respiration or your rate of breathing? Well, you breathe faster, right? Which indicates you need more oxygen, right? Because your body heat is, your body temperature is increasing. Okay, so you need more oxygen as your body temperature increases. It is the exact same for aquatic organisms. Okay, problem with them is that they have a harder time regulating their body temperature because they're dependent on the temperature of the water. So as the temperature of the water increases, so does the temperature of the fish's body, which means, just like you, they need more oxygen. Huge problem there, though, is we just got done talking about the warmer the water, the less dissolved oxygen that's going to be in that water. So the fish have a very hard time dealing with an increase in water temperature. Now, why would water temperatures increase? A lot of different reasons, relating to something we talked a lot about this year, climate change, right? Especially in the summer. As global warming increases, our water temperatures are going to increase, making those fish populations have a harder time. Relating to our water cycle, okay, and human impact there, as we increase the number of roads and homes and things like that, well, we're going to increase the amount of runoff. That runoff will pick up soil. What soil does when it gets into a lake or to a river is, it makes that water murky. And we all know that darker colors or darker surfaces will absorb more energy. So if that river is muddy or murky, it is going to increase its temperature and then therefore decrease its dissolved oxygen. Lower water heights heat up a lot faster. And then again, if we are messing around with our carbon cycle and moving where trees are, usually there's a good amount of vegetation near a riverbank, but we like to kind of clear that away so that we can see the river. That's going to have a huge impact on the temperature of that water as well. Our second way to get oxygen into aquatic ecosystems is through this process of aeration, which is just fancy words for mixing. Okay. And the simple rule here is that the faster the water, the more dissolved oxygen you're going to find. Okay. And anywhere we have a lot of water moving quickly, like a rapids or a waterfall or waves, those things are going to help increase the amount of dissolved oxygen. So this picture over here on the left-hand side is going to have more dissolved oxygen than the one over on the right-hand side. This picture over on the right-hand side is of just stagnant sitting water. Okay, no movement, no mixing of that water. So you're not going to get a chance to mix in that oxygen. What I mean by mixing in of oxygen, so let's say you're at a beach and you see a wave, right? So here's my wave, okay? What we need to remember here is that the atmosphere is 22% dissolved or atmospheric oxygen, right? So as the wave crests, right? Okay, as it gets closer and closer to the surface, there's all of this air right here. And what's in that air? Well, you got nitrogen, right? But then you also have oxygen, okay? And where is that oxygen going to go? Well, when that wave crashes back down, that oxygen then gets mixed into or aerated into that body of water. Okay, so the bigger the waves, the more waves that you have, the more dissolved oxygen you're going to have as well. Okay, and then third way is photosynthesis. Okay, by now this is the way that plants make sugars. They take in carbon dioxide, right? They use some water and energy from the sun to produce the sugar that they need, and as a byproduct, they release oxygen into the atmosphere. Okay, that process that happens on land is the exact same as it happens in water. Okay, it's very easy to forget that there are aquatic plants. There's also other organisms like phytoplankton, cyanobacteria that also do photosynthesis that live in aquatic ecosystems, and they're doing that exact same thing, releasing oxygen as a byproduct of that process of photosynthesis. So the more photosynthesis we have, the more dissolved oxygen we have, and as you go from day and night, you're going to get an increase and then a decrease in the amount of oxygen production from photosynthesis. This is just a quick picture of these phytoplankton. They're single-celled organisms, plants that make up the base of the food chain in a lot of these aquatic ecosystems. Okay, now the second big topic for this video is how is oxygen used up, or another way to think about it is taken out of aquatic ecosystems. Only two here, the process of respiration, we've talked a lot about that, and then also decomposition. Again, we've talked a lot about that. Respiration, carbon cycle, decomposition. Carbon cycle, we also talked about it in impacts in the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle. So hopefully you're starting to see that there are a lot of connections between these different cycles that we've discussed. So simply, respiration is kind of the reverse of photosynthesis. Organisms take those sugars that they are consuming. They then use oxygen to burn the sugars to produce energy, and as a byproduct, some water and carbon dioxide. Okay, organisms that do that on land. Also, there are organisms that do that in aquatic ecosystems. It's the same process, just done slightly differently, but the products and the reactants of the chemical reaction are exactly the same. So if there's a high rate of respiration, there's going to be a higher demand for oxygen. So we need to kind of think about that temperature thing that we discussed earlier. We also need to think about, well, during the day, the whole day, are there times when organisms are going to do more respiration? And are there times when they are going to not do as much respiration? How does that balance that oxygen level in aquatic ecosystems? Okay. The second way to remove oxygen from aquatic ecosystems is decomposition. Okay. We talked a lot about this with the nitrogen cycle and the human impact piece. And we go back to our best friends, the bacteria. And those bacteria, especially the decomposing bacteria, are going to consume, kind of eat or use up that oxygen as they break down that dead decomposing matter. Okay, and what's interesting is, depending on the situation, this bullet point right here says sometimes that those bacteria that are doing decomposition can actually use up oxygen faster than the plants can produce it, even when the plants are producing it the most when there's the most sunlight. Okay, so really important that you remember that those bacteria can be more powerful than those photosynthetic organisms, especially when we get to the stuff down here where humans are adding excess organic matter like the nitrogen, like the phosphorus from fertilizers and sewage, and eventually that whole process leading to fish kills or dead zones. Okay, so again, another way to kind of see how all of these different cycles are coming together. And I'm going to leave you with this sequence. We've seen it before. I want to just show it to you one last time. It's that process of producing dead zones. We have to have some sort of increase in organic matter, whether it's through human interaction or not. That then organic matter is going to be decomposed by a huge increase in bacteria population. They then break down that organic matter and dissolved oxygen levels fall drastically. Okay. What I do want to make sure you guys understand is that places do have a chance and they can recover and dissolved oxygen levels can go back to normal if the ecosystem is given a chance to do so. If it's left alone, if the human impact is decreased, they can come back. The problem is, in most situations, we don't allow these ecosystems to come back. All right, so that is the oxygen cycle. Please take a look at it. If you have any questions, just